The warship Veiled Zorith drifted through the darkness of space, its sleek, obsidian hull reflecting the cold glow of distant stars. Inside, Supreme Captain Cyrillus Vaynar stood tall in the command chamber, her violet skin illuminated by the blue holographic displays around her. She was a warrior of the Zorinthian Empire, bred for conquest, stronger, faster, and superior in every way. Her golden eyes, sharp like a predator's, fixed on the figure standing before her. Dant Cross, a captured human soldier, stood with his hands shackled behind his back. His dark, slightly unkempt hair framed his face, and his piercing gray eyes held no fear. He was taller than Cyrillus had expected, his build strong from years of battle. He should have been trembling in her presence, yet he simply smirked, as if this were some casual conversation rather than an interrogation. "You are in the presence of a supreme captain," one of the guards barked, shoving Dant forward. He barely stumbled. Instead, he straightened his posture and looked directly at Cyrillus. "Impressive title," Dant said, voice smooth but edged with defiance. "Do you give yourselves fancy names to feel powerful, or is that just a you thing?" A tense silence filled the room. The Zorinthian guards tensed, awaiting Cyrillus' reaction. To challenge her authority was to invite swift punishment. And yet, Cyrillus did not strike him. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "I do not need words to remind others of my power, human." She studied him closely, expecting to see a flicker of weakness. Instead, his gaze remained steady, assessing her just as she assessed him. The Empire had taught her that humans were weak, fragile creatures ruled by emotion. But Dant Cross was nothing like the defeated prisoners she had seen before. There was something in his stance, something in his eyes that unsettled her. "You fought well on the battlefield," she admitted, circling him slowly. "Few humans have ever given my forces a challenge. But tell me, why did you not surrender?" Dant chuckled, a low sound that irritated and intrigued her at the same time. "Surrender? You think I just kneel because your people have fancy ships and glowing swords? Sorry, but that's not my style." Her jaw tightened. "Arrogant, reckless, infuriating. Then perhaps you need to be shown your place," she said, her voice sharp. "The Zorinthian Empire crushes those who resist. You are alone. You are outmatched." Dant tilted his head slightly. "Maybe. But if I were truly outmatched, why am I still alive?" That made Cyrillus pause. She had not given the order for his execution, something she would have done with any other prisoner. But there was something different about him, something dangerous. A strange heat stirred in her chest. It was not anger, not quite. "You will undergo testing," she said at last, masking the unfamiliar feeling behind cold authority. "I will see what makes you so bold, and when you finally break, I will know that humans are as weak as I was taught." Dant smiled, a slow, confident grin that made her fingers twitch. "Good luck with that," he said. "You might be disappointed." As the guards dragged him away, Cyrillus found herself watching him longer than she should have. Something about him was unsettling. And though she refused to admit it, something about him was intriguing. For the first time in her life, she wondered, had the Empire underestimated humanity? Or had she? Dant Cross sat in the cold, sterile chamber, his wrists still bound in metallic cuffs. The room was dimly lit, with smooth black walls that hummed faintly with hidden energy. A single observation window loomed above him, though he couldn't see who was watching. He knew she was there, Cyrillus Vaynar. He smirked to himself. The supreme captain of the Zorinthian Empire, proud, cold, and utterly convinced of her superiority. And yet, despite everything, she hadn't executed him. That meant something. The door slid open with a sharp hiss, and Cyrillus entered, flanked by two Zorinthian guards. As always, she moved with a controlled grace, her tall frame exuding strength. The deep violet of her skin contrasted against the dark silver armor she wore, and her golden eyes locked onto him with an unreadable expression. "You look well, considering your position," she remarked, stepping closer. Dant leaned back slightly in his chair, raising a brow. "Well, I would have preferred a welcome party and a warm meal, but I'll take what I can get." One of the guards stiffened at his tone, but Cyrillus didn't react. Instead, she pressed a button on a sleek console beside her. Dant's cuffs released with a soft click. He rolled his wrists, flexing his fingers. "What's this?" he asked, keeping his tone light but wary. "I want to see what you're capable of," Cyrillus said. "The Empire considers your kind primitive, weak. But you are different." Dante stood, stretching his arms. "You don't sound convinced," he said. She motioned to the far wall. With another press of a button, a section of the wall shifted, revealing a large chamber beyond. Inside, strange metallic drones hovered in place, their sleek forms humming with energy. "A combat test," Dante guessed. Cyrillus nodded. "Prove to me that you are more than just an arrogant fool." Dante chuckled, stepping into the chamber. "You really know how to make a guy feel special." The moment he entered, the drones activated. They'd moved fast, faster than anything he had faced on Earth. Twin plasma blades extended from their sides, their edges glowing white-hot. The first drone lunged. Dante barely dodged, twisting his body just in time. The blade missed his ribs by an inch. He reacted on instinct, grabbing a fallen Zorinthian combat staff from the floor. The metal was lighter than he expected, humming with energy as he swung it up to deflect the next attack. Cyrillus watched from the control room, arms crossed. She had expected him to falter, to be overwhelmed. Instead, he adapted, moving with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for a human. Dante gritted his teeth as the second drone slashed at him. He dropped low, spinning the staff before striking the drone's core. Sparks erupted as it crashed to the ground. The final drone rushed forward, its blades spinning in a deadly arc. Dante didn't hesitate. He darted forward, using the staff's momentum to vault himself over the machine. As he landed, he drove the weapon downward, slamming it into the drone's core with a satisfying crack. Silence. Then the chamber's lights shifted back to normal. Dante exhaled, standing straight. He glanced up at the observation window, meeting Cyrillus' gaze. "That all you got?" he called out. For the first time in her life, Cyrillus felt impressed. This human was supposed to be weak, and yet, as she watched him standing there, a smirk on his lips and victory in his stance, she felt something unexpected. Curiosity. And something far more dangerous. Attraction. Cyrillus stood in the control room, her golden eyes fixed on the human below. The combat drones lay in pieces at his feet, their sparking remains proof of his skill. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. He shouldn't have won. The Empire had conquered hundreds of species, each one bending under their might. Humans were supposed to be weaker, less advanced, less disciplined. Yet Dante Cross had moved like a seasoned warrior, adapting faster than any soldier she had ever tested. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She refused to admit that she had underestimated him. Dante rolled his shoulders as the chamber doors hissed open. Two Zorinthian guards entered, their tall frames tense, as if expecting him to attack. Instead, he smirked and tossed the broken staff aside. "That was fun," he said casually. "Do I get a prize?" Cyrillus descended the steps from the control room, her armor gleaming under the cold artificial light. She stopped just a few feet away, studying him closely. His dark hair was slightly damp with sweat, his breathing steady. "You held your own," she admitted, though her tone remained sharp. "But that was merely a test. Against real Zorinthian warriors, you would fall." Dante chuckled, crossing his arms. "Is that a challenge?" Her expression remained unreadable. It is a fact. For some reason, his confidence irritated her. No human had ever looked her in the eye with such ease, as if she were just another person, not the supreme captain of an empire-spanning fleet. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. What makes you so sure of yourself, human? Dante met her gaze without hesitation. Because you keep testing me instead of killing me. His voice dropped slightly, his smirk never fading. Which means, I interest you. A strange heat curled in Cyrillus' chest. It was not anger, not quite. Her guards tensed at his boldness, but she didn't react. Instead, she tilted her head, her sharp golden eyes narrowing slightly. You are not like the others we have captured. Most humans cower in fear, yet you stand before me as if we are equals. Dante shrugged. Fear's a waste of time. You can kill me, or you can keep watching me, trying to figure out why I'm not scared. He took a step closer, his gray eyes searching hers. So what's it gonna be, Captain? The air between them felt charged, something unspoken passing between them. Cyrillus could hear the steady beat of her own heart, though she forced her expression to remain cold. She should have ordered him back to his cell. She should have reminded him of his place. Instead, she did something she never expected. Follow me, she commanded. Dante arched a brow. No cuffs this time. Do not make me regret it. She turned, leading him through the metallic corridors of the ship. The guards followed, but she barely acknowledged them. She had spent years believing her people were the pinnacle of strength, that all other species were inferior. Yet as Dante walked beside her, his steps confident, his presence undeniable, Cyrillus felt something she had never felt before. Doubt. And deep down, an even more dangerous thought lingered. What if the Empire was wrong about humans? Dante followed Cyrillus Vaynar through the sleek corridors of the Zorinthian battleship, his boots making a steady rhythm against the cold metal floor. The guards flanked them, their violet skin illuminated by the dim blue lighting. Despite their presence, Dante could tell this was different. No cuffs, no threats, just curiosity. The supreme captain of the Zorinthian Empire didn't speak, but he could feel the tension in the air. She was thinking. Hard. So, Dante broke the silence, stuffing his hands into his pockets. Where are we going? Dinner. A tour. Maybe a place with a better view. Cyrillus shot him a sidelong glance, her golden eyes unreadable. Do you always talk this much? Only when I'm not tied to a chair, he replied with a smirk. The corner of her lips almost twitched. Almost. They entered a circular chamber lined with holographic displays. The walls pulsed with shifting star maps and data streams. At the center, a single observation platform extended toward a transparent viewport, revealing the vast darkness of space. Dante whistled as he stepped forward. Nice place. He gazed out at the swirling nebula beyond, the twin moons of a distant planet casting a soft glow. Gotta say, you guys have a hell of a view. Cyrillus walked past him, hands clasped behind her back. This is the War Council chamber. Only high-ranking officials are allowed here. Dante turned to her. And you brought me here. Either you're planning to throw me out the airlock, or you want to talk. She faced him fully, the dim light casting sharp shadows across her elegant features. I want answers. Dante leaned casually against the railing. Ask away, Captain. Cyrillus studied him for a long moment before speaking. Your species was never meant to be a threat. The Zorinthian Empire has conquered hundreds of worlds, civilizations far more advanced than yours. And yet, she narrowed her gaze. Humans resist, adapt, survive. Why? Dante considered the question, his smirk fading slightly. Because we don't know how to quit. Cyrillus frowned. That is not an answer. Maybe not, but it's the truth, Dante said. We're not the strongest, the fastest, or the most advanced. But when the odds are against us, we fight harder. When someone tells us something is impossible, we prove them wrong. He met her gaze, his expression serious. It's in our nature. Cyrillus remained silent. It was the first time she had ever heard a human speak about their own kind with such certainty. She had read reports, studied battle records, but this was different. This wasn't data. This was a man standing before her, living proof of what the Empire had overlooked. Dant smirked again, sensing her hesitation. You're starting to believe it, aren't you? Her eyes flashed. Do not presume to know what I think. He held up his hands. Fair enough. But if you really thought humans were nothing, you wouldn't be here asking me questions. Cyrillus exhaled slowly, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Frustration. Interest. A dangerous mix. You are reckless, impulsive, and undisciplined, she stated. Dant chuckled. And yet, here I am. Silence stretched between them. The distant hum of the ship's engines was the only sound. For the first time in her life, Cyrillus found herself questioning everything she had been taught. And she hated it. Cyrillus had never felt uncertain before. Every order she had given, every battle she had won. It had all been based on logic, on strength, on the undeniable superiority of her people. Yet now, standing in the War Council chamber with a human who refused to break, she felt something she couldn't define. Dant leaned against the railing, watching her. His gray eyes held no fear, no submission, only curiosity. He was studying her just as much as she was studying him. So, he said, breaking the silence, what happens now? Are you finally admitting that humans are more than just primitive creatures? Cyrillus narrowed her eyes. Do not assume too much, Dant Cross. He grinned. Then why are we here, Captain? You could have thrown me back in a cell. Instead, we're having a conversation in what I'm guessing is a very restricted area. She clenched her jaw. He wasn't wrong. She should have dismissed him already. Should have ordered the guards to take him away. But something about him made her hesitate. Cyrillus turned, pacing slowly. Your people are unpredictable, she admitted. Unstable. Dangerous. Dant shrugged. You say that like it's a bad thing. It is, she replied coldly. The Empire values control, discipline, order. But humans, you defy everything we know about conquest. Even when you are outmatched, you continue to fight. Dant's smirk faded slightly. Maybe that's because we don't like being controlled. She stopped and faced him. Every species bends to the Empire. Yeah. He tilted his head. And what if humans won't? The question lingered in the air. Cyrillus had never considered that possibility before. Every other species had surrendered eventually, understanding that resistance was futile. But humans, they were different. He was different. Her golden eyes flickered over him, his steady posture, the way he refused to back down. There was no fear in him, no hesitation. She had met the strongest Zorinthian warriors, and even they did not stand so confidently in her presence. For the first time, she wondered what it would be like to fight beside a human rather than against one. A dangerous thought, one she should not be having. Dant suddenly stepped forward, closing some of the distance between them. His voice was lower now, his expression more serious. You've been taught to think we're weak, he said, but deep down, you know that's not true. Cyrillus didn't move. The space between them felt too small, charged with something unfamiliar. She knew she should push him away, remind him of his place. And yet she didn't. Instead, she held his gaze, letting the silence stretch. Letting herself wonder, Dant's smirk returned, softer this time. You're curious, aren't you? Cyrillus exhaled slowly. Perhaps. For now, that was all she was willing to admit. But deep inside, she knew this human had just crossed a line, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to stop him. Cyrillus sat alone in her private chamber, staring at the holographic reports flickering before her. Detailed records of human resistance scrolled down the screen. Battle after battle where her forces had expected an easy victory, only to find themselves outmaneuvered, outlasted, and outmatched in ways that defied all reason. She clenched her jaw. It was him. Dant Cross had been a persistent annoyance since the moment she captured him, but now he was more than that. He was a problem. Not because he was an enemy, not because he was dangerous, but because, against all logic, she didn't want to see him as just another enemy. A sharp knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She straightened, her composure returning like a blade sliding back into its sheath. Enter. The doors hissed open, and Commander Valek stepped inside. He was tall, his violet skin marked with the deep crimson insignia of the Zarinthian elite. His piercing gaze settled on her, his expression unreadable. "Captain," he said, his voice smooth yet heavy with meaning. "I hear the human still breathes." Cyrillus folded her hands behind her back. "He is valuable." Valek's golden eyes darkened. "He is a distraction." Cyrillus met his gaze evenly. "The Empire's greatest strength is understanding its enemies." Valek tilted his head slightly. "And yet you have spent more time understanding this one human than all the others we have captured combined." A silence stretched between them. Cyrillus could feel the unspoken accusation in his words. "He suspects something." She narrowed her eyes. "Do you question my judgment, Commander?" Valek took a step forward, his voice lowering. "I question whether you see this creature for what he is. A lesser being. A primitive. Do not mistake his defiance for worth." Cyrillus held her ground. "And if I do not?" Valek's gaze turned sharp. "Then you are no longer fit to lead." The weight of his words hung in the air, a challenge, a warning. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Cyrillus stepped closer, her voice ice-cold. "If you believe I am unfit, take command." Valek stiffened. They both knew the Zarinthian way. To challenge a superior was to demand a duel. And yet he hesitated, because he knew what she was. The finest warrior of her generation, a woman who had never lost a fight. Valek exhaled slowly and took a step back. "I serve the Empire." Cyrillus nodded. "Then serve it, and leave me to do the same." Valek hesitated for a moment longer before turning sharply on his heel and exiting. The doors sealed behind him with a hiss. Cyrillus closed her eyes briefly. This was dangerous. Her position was now in question. Her authority was cracking, and she knew exactly why. She had allowed a human to matter. She exhaled and turned toward the viewport, staring at the distant stars. In the reflection, she saw movement. Dant stood in the shadows near the door, watching her. "How much of that did you hear?" she asked, not turning. He stepped forward, arms crossed. "Enough to know I'm really messing up your career." Cyrillus let out a breath that was almost, a laugh. "Do you regret it?" Dant asked. She turned to face him fully. The question wasn't simple. It held weight, more weight than she was prepared to carry. For the first time, Cyrillus wasn't sure how to answer. Dante leaned against the cold metallic wall of the chamber, his sharp blue eyes locked onto Cyrillus. His usual smirk was absent, replaced by something quieter, deeper. "So," he said after a moment, "what happens now?" Cyrillus hesitated. She never hesitated. Yet, here she was, standing before a human who had disrupted everything she thought she knew. Her authority was cracking. Commander Valek's challenge had been clear. The High Command would be watching her closely now. And if they sensed any weakness, they would remove her. Permanently. She finally turned toward him, her violet gaze unreadable. "You need to leave." Dant raised an eyebrow. "That's funny. Last time I checked, I wasn't exactly free to stroll out of here. She tapped a few controls on the panel beside her. The lights dimmed slightly, and the force field that had always separated them flickered, then vanished. For a long moment, Dante just stared at her. Then he pushed himself off the wall and took a slow step forward. "Huh, you're actually serious." Cyrillus crossed her arms. "You want to live, don't you?" "Oh, I do," he said, stepping even closer. "But let's be real. You helping me escape, that's suicide." Her jaw tightened. He wasn't wrong. If she was caught, her name would be erased from history. She would be executed without honor. But if she did nothing, if she let him die, she would lose something else entirely. Cyrillus met his gaze. "I have a plan." Dante gave a dry laugh. "Of course you do." She ignored the sarcasm and pulled up a small holo device, displaying a detailed blueprint of the warship. A red line traced a path through the lower levels. "The hangar on Deck 9 has a stealth-class fighter," she explained. "It's lightly guarded at this hour. If we move fast, we can get you off this ship before anyone notices." Dante studied the map, nodding slowly. "And by we, I'm guessing you don't mean me and some friendly guards." "I mean me." His eyes flicked to hers, something unreadable in his expression. "You're coming with me." Cyrillus exhaled. "There's no other way. I'll need to disable security checkpoints myself." Dante rubbed the back of his neck. "This is insane." "Agreed," she said. He let out a breath, glancing between her and the open doorway. His usual confidence flickered for just a second before he nodded. "All right, Captain. Let's make some bad decisions." The corridors of the Zorinthian warship were eerily quiet. It was the deep cycle shift, when most of the crew was either in their quarters or at their assigned posts. Still, security drones hummed along the walls, their glowing red optics scanning for movement. Cyrillus led the way, her steps quick and precise. She moved like a shadow, knowing exactly when to stop, when to move, when to duck into cover. Dante, to his credit, kept up surprisingly well. "Didn't think humans were this good at sneaking," she murmured as they pressed against the bulkhead. "Turns out being underestimated has its perks," he whispered back. A pair of Zorinthian guards passed by, their boots clanking against the steel floor. Cyrillus held her breath. Dante, standing so close she could feel his warmth, barely moved. The guards disappeared around the corner. Cyrillus tapped his arm, and they kept moving. They'd reached the main security checkpoint leading to Deck 9. A glowing force shield blocked the entrance. 2 guards stood in front of it, their weapons at their sides. Cyrillus glanced at Dante. "You trust me?" His grin returned. "Not even a little." She smirked. "Good." Then, without warning, she stepped forward. The guards instantly raised their weapons. "Captain Cyrillus." One of them asked, confused. "Emergency order," she said coolly. "We have a high-value prisoner transfer." Dante straightened, playing the role of an obedient captive. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. The guards exchanged glances. Then one of them tapped his wrist console. The force field dropped. Cyrillus moved lightning fast. She struck first, her elbow slamming into the nearest guard's throat. Before the second could react, Dante lunged, grabbing the alien's weapon and twisting it free. The guards crumpled to the ground. Dante exhaled. "You know, we make a pretty good team." Cyrillus was already moving. "Don't get used to it." They sprinted through the open passageway, the final stretch between them and the escape fighter only seconds away. Then, ALRMs layered through the Iggy ship. Cyrillus cursed. "They know." Dante tightened his grip on the stolen weapon. "So much for the quiet way." Cyrillus looked at him, something flickering in her expression. Then, with deadly determination, she turned toward the hangar doors. "We're finishing this ***, together." The alarms howled through the corridors, red warning lights flashing like angry eyes. Dante gritted his teeth, his pulse pounding as he sprinted beside Cyrillus. The hangar doors were in sight, but the problem was the soldiers blocking their path. A squad of Zarinthian enforcers, armed and armored, stood between them and the stealth-class fighter. Their weapons gleamed under the bright overhead lights, aimed directly at Dante and Cyrillus. "Captain Cyrillus," barked the lead officer, his scaled face twisted in disbelief. "Step away from the human. Now." Cyrillus didn't move. Dante could see it, the hesitation in her stance, the war between duty and instinct. She had spent her entire life serving the Zarinthian Empire, and now, in the span of a few days, she was defying everything she was supposed to believe in. The lead officer's grip tightened on his weapon. "That's an order." Cyrillus finally spoke. "I don't take orders from fools." And then she moved. Fast. A single shot from her pulse weapon dropped the first soldier. Before the others could react, she and Dante were already moving. Dante ducked behind a cargo crate as blaster fire rained around them. He rolled, raised his stolen weapon, and fired back. One shot hit a fuel canister near the squad. Boom! A small explosion erupted, sending 2 soldiers flying. The others staggered back, disoriented just long enough for Cyrillus to lunge forward and take down another. Dante smirked, breathing heavily. "I'm starting to think you enjoy this." Cyrillus didn't answer, grabbing his wrist instead. "Move." They sprinted toward the fighter. The sleek black stealth ship was already primed for launch. Cyrillus had planned this well, but there was no time to admire the engineering. Heavy footsteps pounded behind them. More soldiers were coming. Cyrillus slammed her palm against the fighter's control panel. The hatch hissed open, and Dante leaped inside. Cyrillus turned to follow, and then Commander Valak appeared. He landed like a shadow, his long cloak billowing. His violet eyes burned with anger. "Captain Cyrillus," he said, his voice quiet but deadly, "you have disgraced your name." Cyrillus held her ground. "My name is still mine, Commander, and I choose what it stands for." Valak lunged. Their blades clashed in a flash of silver. Cyrillus met his every strike, her movements precise, controlled. But Valak was stronger. Each blow pushed her closer to the edge of the loading ramp. Dante's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to help, but Cyrillus had said it herself. Valak was one of the strongest warriors in the fleet. Still, Dante wasn't one to sit back and watch. He grabbed the stealth fighter's control panel and activated the thrusters. The sudden blast of energy knocked Valak off balance, and Cyrillus seized her chance, a final strike to his leg. Valak stumbled, his blade slipping from his grasp. Cyrillus didn't hesitate. She spun, grabbed Dante's outstretched hand, and leaped into the fighter. The hatch sealed behind them. Dante scrambled into the pilot's seat as the control systems lit up. Cyrillus took the co-pilot's chair, her fingers flying over the dashboard. "Do you even know how to fly this thing?" Dante asked, gripping the throttle. Cyrillus shot him a sideways glance. "No." Dante grinned. "Perfect." The engines roared to life. The hangar bay doors started closing, but it was too late. The stealth ship shot forward, blasting through the force field and out into open space. The Zarinthian warship shrunk behind them as they sped toward the vast unknown. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Dante leaned back, exhaling. That was insane. Cyrillus stared at the stars ahead. Yes. Silence. Then, Dante glanced at her. "So, what now?" Cyrillus met his gaze, violet eyes unreadable. "We survive." And with that, they vanished into the cosmos, the beginning of something neither of them could have ever predicted.